there's a certain type of character online these days that I think you see a lot of, which is a guy that kind of has sort of centrist pretensions, but is very obviously just kind of like this far right kind of crank. And I feel like I see this a lot. And so when I kind of saw you sort of making some of those pretensions at first, I was a little curious or a little skeptical. But then I watched some of your videos, and it does seem like you genuinely do have split the baby sort of attitude towards a lot of the political challenges, and you seem genuinely, like, this is the thing, right? It's like seeming genuinely critical of both the far left and the far right.
ContraPoints could have ended this video by reaffirming a universal moral truth that's embedded in every major religion, espoused by Mahatma Gandhi, Martin Luther King, Viktor Frankl. If you want to be able to address evil in the world, you have to start by addressing the evil within yourself. I understand the impulse to call people who sexualize themselves around children evil, but the problem that Matt Walsh is making, and that I think the far right is making, is not understanding that the capacity for evil lies within everybody. To say that those people there are uniquely evil is exactly the same incorrect point that everyone makes about another human being. And if these people are evil in a fundamental sense, well, that justifies doing anything to them.
Or even just the moderate right and the moderate left and sort of the various dysfunctions on those sides. Like, I find that's very rare, because I find that people are usually only willing to criticize up to a point, because they're still fundamentally captive to one of these two sort of tribal communities in order to make their sort of their living as a political commentator. And I feel like there are still, like, if I'm going to be honest, there's maybe like still some aspects of you that strike me as a little sort of prone to the kind of somewhat crankish sort of belief system that I think people who make a big deal about being in the moderate middle tend to have.
Yes.
You know, I think that there's a kind of like sweeping dismissal of basically all authority structures and basically all sort of like manifestations of the quote unquote establishment that I kind of think people of your sort of political disposition are sometimes prone to, which I think can be problematic in its own way. But overall, I feel like I think that you have made a good faith effort to kind of criticize the excesses of both sides, and that your videos, you know, from video to video, you know, it's a little unpredictable about who you're going to be taking aim at. And I feel like that is certainly not something that you could say about, you know, a self-proclaimed centrist like a Tim Pool type, right? Who is very clearly like a kind of like right-coded figure at this moment, despite what he may profess to be. Or Dave Rubin, or, you know, like there's a whole sort of set.
Yes, classical liberal. In other words, conservative. Yeah, I noticed there's a common thing where people who are in the middle, coded one way or the other, it's like, well, of course I don't agree with police abuses. Of course I don't agree with that or whatever. But look at all the stuff that BLM does. Or like, of course I don't agree with like transgender surgeries for children. But like, look at all the far right. And it's like, if you only just offhand say, well, of course I don't agree with that. Of course I don't agree with the extreme people on my side. But here's the bigger issue on the left. It's like, no. You should be just as passionate about cleaning up the idiots on your side who make your side look bad. Right. So if you're a conservative and you're not actively going after the Christian nationalists who are like, we should roll back gay marriage and all that shit, it's like, okay, well, by not addressing them, you're letting them get more and more steam to the point where it just undermines your credibility. And then if you're on the left and it's like, hey, we genuinely want to create space for, let's say, transgender adults to just be able to live their life. It's like, okay, well, then you have an obligation to call out the, in my opinion, weird shit when it gets to children, where it's like, well, no, a 12-year-old is capable of making these decisions. It's like, well, hold on. Let me get on board with the adults being able to make their own decisions and living their life. But as soon as you move it to children, that's a different thing. And with the right wing, it's like, well, marriage is a fundamental institution we need to protect. It's like, I agree. Okay, but well, we need to get rid of gay marriage. It's like, okay, well, now you're just getting too extreme. So
the one sort of thing that I think you have brought up in some of your videos that I do think is interesting is, I think you've sort of said it in this kind of explicit terms. You like to kind of sow division within the different sides. Like, which I think is something, frankly, like, you know, I mean, that sounds like it can be sort of nefarious, but I do think it is important because, yeah, like what you said is very true. People will often kind of do this kind of throat clearing where it's like, well, of course I don't agree with everything that, you know, the right does or the left does or whatever. But I think that not often enough, we do not like start drilling down into that. It's like, go on about that. What don't you agree with?
Build your credibility. Don't just offhand it. Yeah. Explain exactly why exactly are you, well, of course I don't agree with that. Well, it's not just, of course I don't agree with that. It's like, no. Yeah. White nationalism is cringy. It's freakish. It's losers in their parents' basement. This is what I wish Trump did. You know, like when Trump was talking to like white national, it's like Trump's whole brand is, you know, he's a winner and all that, right? It's like, Trump, you could just say, Of course I don't support white nationalism because I don't support losers in their mom's basement making 4chan memes. Call it out and do it in a way that's sincere, not just like, well, I don't want to upset my base or whatever.
The incentive structures point away from that kind of thing. Because, you know, as much as people profess that, you know, this pundit class, that they're like serious people with good ideas and all the rest of it, you know, they do have a base, they have to pander. And like, I mean, I speak with some knowledge of it. Is, you know, I worked as a political commentator for many years, a pundit. I worked on quite a partisan network up here in Canada. And you sort of see, you have like instant feedback. And I mean, even more so in the era of social media, when you're making YouTube videos or tweets or whatever, you see what gets the reaction and what doesn't get a positive reaction. And you just kind of give the base more the red meat, as they say, right? There's very little incentive structure in telling your audience what they don't want to hear. And so that's why I think it's genuinely quite rare to have people of true principle in political commentary. It's unfortunate because there's a lot of just interesting conversations that are going unsaid, because people are afraid that their audience would turn on them if they even begin to broach some of these topics.
Yeah, and I think, well, part of it is you have to cultivate an audience that is willing to not be told they're wrong, but be willing to hear different perspectives. You know, it's like I think I saw Greg Gutfield talking to Bill Maher, where Greg Gutfield said something like, Ilhan Omar, you know, she did this good thing or whatever, but you can't give her credit because you'll lose an audience that way. It's like, why is that clip says everything you need to know about, well, the audience capture and stuff. And it's like, there is something I do find annoying. Like Andrew Sullivan, I generally like, but one time he was on Bill Maher and he was very critical of Trump in sort of an over the top way that was almost a virtue signal, because he was going after the left. He was saying like, you know, there's a lot of anti-white racism. There's weird stuff going on with like transgender issues, but Donald Trump's an absolute buffoon and all that. Which is like, that's fair. That's sort of what I do, where it's like, hey, I'm willing to say this is extreme and this is extreme, because that's just the common sense perspective. 85% of people, especially people who are not terminally online, agree. And what you had mentioned in your video, it's like people have all these ideologies that are so detached from reality. It's like, well, yeah, the overwhelming majority of people who live day-to-day life, it's like, well, some of them are conservative. If blue-collar workers are on average more conservative and fans of Trump, and then doctors and lawyers and stuff are on average more liberal, it's like, okay, well, the people that ensure that your toilet works, like, which you're pretty dependent on, you should respect them, because even if they're Trump voters, and then the people who you go to when you have cancer or whatever, it's like, you should be respecting them as well. And I get there's this like, well, you know, we should all just come together and have this Socratic kumbaya dialogue or whatever. That I hate. That was did you see my anti-intellectualism is base video by any chance?
Yes, I did. I thought that was interesting. Yeah.
My whole point in that is like, Socratic dialogue it's useful. There's a place for it, like kind of in this discussion where you get two people who are good faith and can have a discussion. But as soon as you think like, well, Socratic dialogue is how we change people's minds, it's like, I don't know. I feel like honestly articulating your authentic experience is demonstrating that you're someone worthy of being listened to is at least as important as saying the right things, because chances are you're never going to be able to say the right things out of the infinite things you could say. It's difficult.